So this is our 8th and final video on Reconstruction, and this one's called What Might Have Been. Interesting to speculate, what would have happened had, Andrew Johnson not been president after Lincoln, or if Ulysses S. Grant wasn't president after Johnson. What if somebody better, who understood these issues better and had a more accurate sense of reality, what if that person could have been president? What might that have looked like, and who might that have been? If there's one man for the job that I could pick from that time, it would be Thaddeus Stevens, a congressman from Pennsylvania. The thing that I think qualifies Stevens most is at a time when people are looking around to take the temperature of the room and how do people feel about this, he doesn't really care about that. He's like, all men are created equal and they're endowed with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's what the country's about. That's why we're here. And black people are getting denied that. And that's not okay. So we're going to do whatever's necessary to make sure that they are enfranchised like everybody else. What an extraordinary man he was. He had absolutely no interest in impressing other people. So almost all of his major charitable acts were done behind the scenes. If he saw somebody in need, he was a successful enough businessman in his own life. He had resources. He would find a way to get those people the resources they needed, whether it's money or education or whatever. He wrote the 14th Amendment. He worked hard for the 15th Amendment. He's chose to be buried in a pauper cemetery because he refused to be in a cemetery that only allowed white people and excluded other people. Just a direct interest in justice, and none of the puffery of honor of sort of Jeb Stuart and that crowd wanting to impress other people by their deeds. He's just devoted to justice, and he just pursues it with a dogged determination that seemed unlike anybody else at that time. And Stevens' view was very powerful, and in hindsight, he was just spot on accurate. He's like, we're not a confederacy, we're building a nation here. And a nation, to be a nation, needs that its constituents actually buy into its fundamental principles. So, half the country can't just ignore the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And so he said, in order to get fully readmitted, the southern states need to give blacks the vote. They need to give land to the black people, and they have to guarantee equality under the law. And if they're not willing to do that, then they don't get to be part of the country in good standing, and we need to keep troops down there as long as necessary until they do assent to that. Because he realized the freedmen needed land, they needed rights, and they needed somebody to enforce those. He just knew who he was dealing with. He knew he was dealing with unconverted white Southern aristocrats who wanted things to be like they were in 1850. And everybody else just sort of crossed their fingers. And Stevens just fought as hard as anybody could really fight to achieve what needed to be achieved to make things work. Unfortunately, he didn't carry the day. And again, we had a century of more problems because of it. So I tramp a perpetual journey, the main metaphor for the class. let's take some time here and think that through. So we make some huge strides, and the issue is, who counts? In 1776, 1780s, it was landholding adult white male citizens who counted. And now it's all adult male citizens, regardless of their race. That's huge. That incorporates millions more people into who counts. So the journey of freedom goes forward. But remember, it's not so simple. So you've got it in the spirit of the Declaration of Independence, but it's not in the law in 1776. In the 1860s, it gets into the law, but it's not in practice. People won't do it. They won't live by it. And so there's a big asterisk next to this triumph, because it's going to take another 100 years in the South before these issues become more or less real, even though there's still struggles today. So we got to keep in mind vision, legislation, action, head, heart, hands, understanding, feeling, and doing. They're all necessary. They all have to act in concert for gains to be made socially. So takeaways for this particular video: if you could explain how Thaddeus Stevens differed from Johnson, Grant, and Hayes as a person and in his policy preferences, and explain how Reconstruction might have worked better if Stevens had become president. And now some more vital questions from the whole series. So I want us to think about, who counts as we, and who do we include in our in-group, and think about the extraordinary suffering, just unbelievable suffering of so many Black Americans, Native Americans, immigrants, that were caused by people loving to have a little group that they consider theirs and having a bigger group that doesn't get to be in their group, and treating them differently. And that's what this came down to. And to empathize with 10 people you're close to, and not to empathize with the rest of the world, what a bizarre choice to make. And so here you are in 8th grade. It's a time that's notorious for in-group formation and exclusion. And so we're really trying to get you to think through, are you an in-grouper? Are you somebody who likes to draw boundaries and exclude other people? Or do you really want everybody to succeed? Remember, we call that benevolence, when you're just after the good for everybody, and empathy and compassion, and you actually own the success of all of your peers, of everybody in the 8th grade, and everybody in the middle school, and everybody at St. Mark's, and everybody in Dallas, and everybody on the earth. And some of those people might be behaving in ways where they're your enemies. But the hope would be that even when you're fighting them, you would hope, you hope that their lives would be good. You wish their lives were good, right? Even though you have to fight them because you disagree about whatever. And so really try to think through, why put people in an out-group? Look at all of the harm that was done by racism in America, and is still done by racism in America, but particularly in the South, both in terms of the people who are on the receiving end, but also the people on the doling out end. Like, why not support those people and revel in their success? Why build these walls? So we really want you to ask yourselves, like, is your eighth grade class strengthened when you exclude people, when you mock people, when there's somebody who's sort of weak and you push them aside rather than helping them, right? Why would you do that? Like, why don't you empathize and be compassionate with that person and be benevolent and help that person grow and own that growth yourself? You're just going to cause division in your class, right? Which is going to have to be settled down the road. Why would you not want somebody's energy positive and growing in among your own peers and your people that you go to school with, right? Why don't you own the success of everybody in your class, everybody in middle school? Well, wouldn't everything go better for you? And aren't you going to learn terrible habits by building these out groups? Are you going to build out groups at work? Are you going to have out groups in your family? Will you favor one of your children over others? Like, how is this all going to play out? Why do this? Isn't it just harmful? So give that some thought. And then finally, just see the terrible consequences when people don't exercise ethical leadership, when they work for their own good and their own prejudices instead of the community as a whole. Terrible things follow from that. And so we just witnessed it where corrupt politicians, corrupt businessmen, people who want to abuse other people in order to try to wring gain out of them rather than owning their success and thrilling in everybody's thriving. So if you've got people who are working for everybody's thriving, those tend to be thriving, healthy communities. And when you have people acting on their own account, they tend to be divisive and the people aren't happy and things don't go well. So it's a self-defeating act to hurt somebody else in today's world. We're too interconnected. That doesn't work anymore. And so I hope that the lessons of Reconstruction aren't lost on you.